The letter arrived like a struck match, brief, bright, and gone before you could be sure you'd seen it. It's a Tuesday morning in February, and Cassandra Alderman is sitting in a laundromat in Roanoke, Virginia, watching her last clean pair of jeans tumble in a dryer she paid for in quarters. Her phone rings, unknown number, 802 area code. She almost lets it go to voicemail, almost. What would you do if the voice on the other end told you that you'd just inherited a farm? Cassie was 27, living in a studio apartment so small the pull-out couch touched the kitchenette when fully extended, working 2 jobs, barista in the morning, data entry in the evenings, and still coming up about $400 short each month. Her mother, Linda Alderman, had died 9 weeks earlier of a sudden stroke. No warning, no goodbye. Linda had left no life insurance, a savings account that barely covered the funeral, and a small mountain of medical debt that wasn't technically Cassie's responsibility, but felt like it was, the way grief has of making everything feel like your fault. Cassie had no siblings. Her father, Roy Alderman, had walked out before she turned 3. No grandparents she'd ever met, no aunts or uncles she knew of, just a handful of friends and a cat named Biscuit, currently boarding with a neighbor because her lease said no pets. She had no safety net. She had nothing. So when a man identifying himself as Lawrence Oates, an estate attorney in Staunton, Virginia, told her that a woman named Helen Brauer had died and left her the entirety of Brauer Hollow Farm, 42 acres of lavender fields and woodland in the Shenandoah Valley, Cassie assumed one of 2 things, a cruel joke or a wrong number. "I don't know anyone named Helen Brauer," she said. "I've never even been to the Shenandoah Valley." A pause, measured and careful, the kind of pause attorneys make when they're about to say something that will complicate your entire week. "Mrs. Alderman," Lawrence said, "Helen knew who you were. She provided your full name, your date of birth, your mother's maiden name, your current address. The identification is ironclad. The estate is real. And I think when you come in, there are things Helen wanted you to understand about why she made this choice." Cassie sat in that laundromat a long time after she hung up, her jeans long since dry and going cold in the drum. She drove to Staunton 3 days later. Lawrence Oates was a compact, silver-haired man in his late 60s, a tidy grey beard, the patient, slightly weary expression of someone who'd spent 40 years watching families tear themselves apart over property lines and disputed wills. His office smelled of old books and lemon wood polish. He offered her coffee, which she accepted because she hadn't eaten since morning, and let her hold the mug with both hands for a moment before he began. Helen Brauer had died at 84, in the farmhouse she'd lived in alone for 19 years since her husband Warren passed. She had no children. Her only surviving family was a nephew, Marcus Brauer, who lived in Arlington and worked in commercial real estate. Helen had specifically and explicitly excluded Marcus from the will, and had been, in Lawrence's words, extremely thorough about making that exclusion difficult to challenge. Everything, the farmhouse, the fields, the outbuildings, the equipment, the remaining liquid assets, went to Cassie. Why? She didn't know me. "She knew of you," Lawrence said. "She knew your grandmother, June Alderman, for most of her life. June passed before you were born, I understand, but Helen considered her one of the most important people who ever came into her life." He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. "She asked that you read this before you decide anything." The handwriting inside was shaky but deliberate, the cursive of someone who'd grown up practicing penmanship daily. "Cassie," it began, "I know you don't know my name. I know your grandmother never talked about me, or the Shenandoah, or the years she spent here before she built her life in Tennessee. She stayed quiet to protect you, and she was right to. But I am old now, and the thing we kept quiet for 50 years is still sitting beneath my floorboards, and it can't stay there much longer. The farm is yours if you want it, but wanting it means you'll have to come find out what's buried in it. I'm sorry that I'm asking this of a girl I've never met. Your grandmother was the bravest person I ever knew. I believe you are too. Helen." There was a stipulation. There is always a stipulation in stories like this one. Before the deed could transfer, and before she could sell or develop anything, Cassie had to spend 30 consecutive days living in the farmhouse. Leave for more than a single overnight, and the estate would pass to the Shenandoah Valley Land Conservancy, with a clause specifically barring Marcus Brauer or any of his associates from ever buying or developing the land. Helen was very deliberate, Lawrence said, watching her face. She wanted whoever inherited that farm to understand it before deciding what to do with it. "What's it worth?" Cassie asked, because she was $27 and $400 short every month, and she had to ask. The land alone, at current market rate, is approximately $2.3 million. She drove home, packed a duffel bag, and called her neighbor to check on Biscuit. Cassie arrived at Brauer Hollow on a Thursday afternoon in late February, when the Shenandoah Valley was still locked in the gray, bone-deep cold that settles there and doesn't leave until April. The farm sat at the end of a long gravel road winding off Route 340, flanked by split-rail fencing that listed at uneven angles, whole posts given up and leaning into the overgrown margins. The lavender fields lay bare and skeletal in winter, cut back to low-grey mounds stretching across the hillside like rows of sleeping animals. The farmhouse itself was a 2-story white clapboard with a wide front porch and dark green shutters, solid in its bones but wearing its age plainly, paint peeling at the eaves, a drainpipe pulled loose at the corner, a porch step that gave softly underfoot. It was beautiful the way tired, honest things are beautiful. Cassie pulled around to the side yard and sat a moment with the engine running. Then she got out. "You're Helen's girl." She didn't scream, but it was close. At the edge of the woodshed stood an older man, arms folded across the chest of a heavy canvas barn coat. Perhaps 70, built low and solid, a broad weathered face and pale grey eyes, taking a quiet, thorough inventory of her from 10 feet away. The stillness of someone who'd spent a lot of time outdoors alone and stopped feeling the need to fill silence. "Eugene Farrow," the man said. He didn't move toward her, didn't offer a hand. "I have the property just north of the tree line, been keeping an eye on this place since Helen's hip went bad 2 winters ago. She gave me a key." "Cassie Alderman," she said, because it seemed required. Eugene looked at her a long moment. Something moved through his expression. Recognition, maybe, or something older and more complicated. "You've got June's forehead," he said finally, in a tone that made clear he wasn't going to say more about it right then. He reached into his coat pocket and produced an old iron key on a wooden fob. Helen kept the heating oil topped up through Christmas. "Well, pump runs, but it's temperamental in the cold. Let it run a minute before you trust it. Firewood stacked in the shed, more than enough through March." He held out the key. "There's a room off the back parlor Helen kept locked. She said you'd find your way to it when you were ready." He turned and walked toward the tree line. "Wait," Cassie called. "What's in the room?" He paused without turning around. "Everything," he said, and walked into the trees and was gone. The first week at Brauer Hollow was a study in solitude and slow unease. The farmhouse was immaculate in a way that felt deeply personal. Helen had spent her final years carefully preserving it, refinishing floors, patching plaster, replacing weather stripping. Every room smelled faintly of dried lavender, bundles of it tucked into corners and hung from ceiling beams. Framed photographs lined the walls and mantelpiece, black and white and early color, spanning decades, all of the same landscape, the fields, the mountains, the house in various states of youth and age. Faces appeared in some, a young couple standing in the lavender at full summer bloom, a dark-haired woman laughing on the porch steps. Cassie looked at that last one a long time, standing in the low golden light of the parlor lamp. The dark-haired woman was her grandmother. June, maybe 25, in a dress Cassie recognized from the one photo her mother had kept. The same print fabric, the same way of holding her chin up when she laughed, as if daring the world to argue with her. June had been here. June had known this place the way you only know somewhere you've loved. Cassie went to bed with the photograph on the nightstand and lay awake, listening to the old house settle in the winter wind. She had one bar of signal near the east-facing window upstairs. She used it to search for Helen Brauer, then Warren Brauer, and found almost nothing. A brief obituary for Helen, a decades-old notice about a regional farming cooperative called the Valley Growers Collective that Warren had managed in the 1970s. A small item about the cooperative's dissolution in 1978. She fell asleep with her phone on her chest and dreamed of lavender in summer, vast purple rows of it moving in a wind she couldn't feel. On the fourth day, she found the locked room. She'd been methodically inventorying the house, the practical thing to do, since she'd have to decide what to sell and what to keep, and working her way through the ground floor when she found it, a heavy panelled door off the back of the parlour, half hidden behind a tall bookshelf pushed close against the wall. The shelf held volumes on lavender cultivation, soil science, Virginia history, and a long run of farm journals in green cloth covers. She moved it carefully, revealing a door secured with a keyed deadbolt, the same iron key Eugene had given her. She unlocked it. The room had clearly been a sitting room once, converted into something between a study and an archive. A roll-top desk sat against the far wall, its surface organized with the precision of someone who'd spent a great deal of time keeping things in order. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with books but labeled accordion files and document boxes arranged chronologically back to the early 1970s. At the center of the desk sat a plain white envelope, Cassie printed on the front, in the same shaky, deliberate hand as the letter from Lawrence's office. "By now you've had a few days to feel the place," Helen wrote. "Good. I wanted you to have that first. The room will wait. What's in the boxes and in the drawer beneath the left side of the desk is the reason your grandmother left Virginia in the spring of 1978 and never came back. She took some of what's in that drawer with her. I kept the rest. Between the two of us, we held the whole truth for 46 years. I'm sorry it falls to you now. But Marcus is coming. He's been coming for a long time. And whatever he tells you, whatever he offers you, you need to know what is actually buried in this ground before you decide anything. The key to the desk drawer is in the blue teacup on the second shelf. Be ready, Cassie. The truth in this room is ugly and necessary in equal measure. You are more ready than you know." The blue teacup, painted with small white flowers, held a small brass key. Cassie found the drawer, unlocked it, and pulled it open. Inside, a stack of documents in plastic sleeves, a photograph, and a small green ledger with a cracked spine. The photograph showed two women in the lavender fields, mountains hazy behind them in high summer. Young, same strong cheekbones, same direct gaze Cassie had seen on the mantel. The other was June. Between them on the ground lay an open ledger. Both women wore the look of people who had just made an irreversible decision. Cassie opened the ledger. The entries were cramped and hurried. Columns of numbers and initials, farm names, amounts. The plastic sleeve documents were clean, notarized copies, and they recorded in careful detail what Warren Brauer had spent 4 years doing to his neighbors. Warren had run the Valley Growers Collective, a cooperative pooling purchasing power for over 30 small farms across the county. He managed the accounts, ordered the supplies, and beginning in 1974, he'd quietly skimmed from all of it, inflating invoices, pocketing rebates, redirecting payments to a private account in Charlottesville. By 1978, he'd taken somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 from families already running on thin margins. Some had taken out loans to cover costs his fraud had artificially inflated. At least 4 families lost their farms. The money, Helen's marginal note said, was in the house. Cassie sat back in the desk chair and felt a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. She heard the car before she saw it, a dark green Range Rover coming up the gravel road with the unhurried confidence of someone who believed he had every right to be there. A man stepped out, perhaps 45, heavy-shouldered, a charcoal wool coat that fit well, boots that cost more than her monthly rent. A face that had probably been handsome in a generic way once, settled now into something harder to read. He knocked. Cassie came out onto the porch. "Cassie Alderman." He smiled to Marcus Brauer. "Helen was my aunt." "I know who you are," Cassie said. His smile recalibrated. "Then you know this whole situation is genuinely strange, and probably overwhelming. I'm not here to make your life difficult." He spread his hands. "I just want to talk." She let him talk on the porch, in the cold, and didn't invite him in. Marcus was smooth. He acknowledged straight away that Helen had cut him from the will. Old tensions, he understood. He accepted it. What he wanted, he said, was a private purchase. No courts, no probate delays. He had a buyer ready, a developer planning a boutique agritourism resort. Lavender fields, mountain views, weekend packages for DC professionals. $800,000. Above market for a fast cash close. Paperwork within a week. She could leave with close to $1 million and be back in Roanoke before the month was out. "You'd break the residency clause," Cassie said. "The Conservancy gets it if you break the clause," Marcus said easily. "But I have relationships with the board. We could structure something that works for everyone." He paused. "Cassie, you're 27, living paycheck to paycheck. Helen was a lovely woman, but she had no right to drag a stranger into a 50-year-old situation over a friendship with your grandmother decades ago. Take the money. Start your life." She looked at him. He was good. She'd give him that. He'd prepared this pitch. He'd done his research on her. "What situation?" she said. The smoothness slipped, just for a second. "I'm sorry?" "You said a 50-year-old situation. What situation are you referring to?" He recovered cleanly. "I only mean Helen had a complicated life here, especially after Warren passed. Old properties carry old weight. You don't need to inherit any of that." Cassie said. "I'll think about it." After he drove off, she went straight back to the locked room and stayed there 4 hours. Warren Brauer, she learned from Helen's meticulous records, had not simply been a thief. In August of 1978, when Helen and June were in his desk and confronted him, he told them he was taking everything and leaving the country, and that he'd torched the house and barn before he left, insurance fraud to cover his exit. He wanted them both gone before he did it. Helen's notes didn't spare detail. He had a gun, she wrote at the bottom of one page. He had been drinking since noon. June had the ledger. I had the cast-iron skillet from the stove. I don't know which of us he intended to use it on first. What followed was documented in a single stark paragraph. Warren had lunged for June. Helen struck him across the shoulder with the skillet. Not hard enough to do more than stagger him, but hard enough that he turned, lost his footing on the kitchen's uneven floorboards, and went backward through the open cellar door, 8 feet onto a stone floor. He did not get up. Helen called the sheriff's department. The deputy who responded was 26 years old and had answered 3 domestic violence calls to the Brauer property in the previous 2 years. His name was Eugene Farrow. He filed it as an accident. No criminal investigation. In the weeks that followed, Helen, with nowhere else to turn and no idea what else to do, sealed the section of the root cellar floor where Warren lay under new concrete and reported him to the authorities as having fled the country, consistent with what he'd told them he intended. The cash and bearer bonds he'd accumulated, along with all the documentation of his fraud, she left sealed in 2 old steamer trunks in that same section of the cellar. June took copies of the ledger and the original fraudulent invoices, moved to Tennessee within the month, changed her last name when she married, and never came back. Helen stayed. She spent the next 45 years farming lavender, living directly above the evidence, rebuilding the cooperative under new management, watching the valley slowly recover from what Warren had taken. And every single year, without fail, she paid the county land tax. 45 years of receipts, meticulous and complete, filed away in the accordion boxes. Cassie understood then why Helen had needed someone to come here. Not just to receive the property, to witness it. She was still in the study at 9 that night when she heard gravel crunch outside, not a car. Footsteps, more than one person. She switched off the desk lamp. Through the gap in the curtain, a flashlight beam moved across the side yard toward the barn. Another came around the far side of the house toward the back porch. Marcus's Range Rover sat at the bottom of the road, lights off. She had 1 bar of service, not enough for a call. She texted 911 with her location and intruder. Please send deputy, hit send, and watched the loading indicator spin. 1 door led to the hallway, now between her and whoever was moving around the back of the house. 1 window faced the north field. She opened it. The night was brutally cold, the ground frozen solid. She dropped into the side yard, stayed low against the foundation, and moved for the tree line along the north field. Someone was at the back door, not knocking, working the lock. She ran. She stuck to the field's eastern edge, where the old stone wall gave her cover to drop behind if she needed it. Her car sat on the south side of the house between her and them. No reaching it. She pushed into the trees, moving by memory and moonlight up the ridge, stepping over roots she couldn't quite see, the cold deepening with every minute. She thought of nothing but the next foot forward, and of Eugene, and of the property just north of the tree line. It took her 12 minutes to find the cabin. Lights were on inside. She pounded on the door. Eugene opened it, looked at her face, and said, "Get inside." He didn't ask what happened. He crossed straight to the rifle cabinet in the corner, the same unhurried competence she'd seen from him that first day, unlocked it, and drew out a rifle with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been thinking about this possibility for a long time. He came with people, Cassie said, at least 2 others. I know. Eugene went to the window, looking down toward the farmhouse where 2 flashlight beams moved inside. He came by here this afternoon, about 20 minutes after he left you. Wanted to talk about the property, wanted to know what I knew about the cellar. You know about the cellar, Cassie said. It wasn't a question. Eugene was quiet a moment. Helen told me, he said finally, the night it happened. Called me at home after I filed the report and told me everything. His eyes didn't leave the window. I was 26. I'd been in love with Helen Brauer since I was 19, and she used to bring preserves to the farmer's market in Bridgewater. A pause. Warren broke her collarbone in 1975, her wrist in 1976. I wrote those up too. I did what the law told me to do, which was essentially nothing. His jaw tightened. When she called that August night, I drove out here and saw what his drinking and his gun had nearly done, and I made a decision. Bought the land north of the ridge the following year. Never left. Through the window, 1 flashlight beam was moving toward the barn. He's looking for the root cellar, Cassie said. There's a door in the barn floor. I know. Eugene lifted a handheld radio from the counter, old, the kind local farmers still used where cell service ran thin. I have a direct line to the county sheriff's office. Roy Lynn's been night dispatcher 11 years, my voice. He keyed it. Roy, it's Gene Farrow. Need 2 units at Brauer Hollow Farm, Route 340. Unauthorized entry, at least 3 individuals. 1 is a Marcus Brauer, Arlington. Tell them to come down the access road, quiet and dark. Roy's voice crackled back, steady and unhurried. Copy that, Gene, ETA 12 minutes. They stood at the window and watched. Marcus and 2 associates, a younger man and a thick-set woman in a work coat, both carrying equipment bags, had broken the padlock on the barn's side door and gone in. For several minutes, nothing was visible from the ridge. Then the barn's interior lights came on, and Marcus's shape appeared briefly in the doorway, speaking into a phone. He found the cellar access, Eugene said. He's been planning this for months, years maybe. He knew what was down there. Suspected. Warren used to tell the family there was money somewhere. Stories that got passed down and exaggerated until Marcus decided they were probably true. Something moved beneath Eugene's even voice, the weariness of a man who'd been bracing for a specific disaster for a very long time and had gotten tired of bracing. Helen kept the farm because she couldn't leave it to anyone else. Sell it, and whoever bought it might find the cellar eventually. Leave it to the Conservancy, and they'd run a full survey. She needed someone who'd understand what it meant and decide with all of it in view. Someone connected to the truth of it. Me, Cassie said. June said quietly, yes. The sheriff's cars came down Route 340 dark, 2 cruisers pulling wide into the farm road. Marcus's Range Rover sat where no one could miss it. From the ridge, Cassie watched the barn lights die and 3 figures come out the side door into the deputy's flashlight beams. Marcus talked. She could see it even from a distance, the body language of a man switching instantly from operational to lawyerly, already reaching for his phone, already framing this as a misunderstanding. A deputy put a hand on his shoulder, and that conversation ended. Cassie and Eugene came down and gave their statements. 2.5 hours. The deputies found the barn's access to the root cellar, and Cassie walked them through what Helen's documents described. The sealed section of the floor was still sealed. Marcus's team had found it but hadn't broken through. A forensic team would come in the morning. It was nearly midnight when the last cruiser pulled out. Cassie stood on the porch in the cold, looking out at the lavender fields under a sky dense with stars, thinking of her grandmother standing in that photograph, chin up, in this same valley. Eugene came and stood beside her. She never talked about it, Cassie said. My grandmother. Not to my mother, not to anyone. My mother didn't even know she'd been in Virginia. June was protecting her family, Eugene said, the way Helen stayed here to protect hers, a silence. Helen never remarried, had chances. Always said the farm needed her full attention, a longer one. I never pushed. Wasn't my place. Cassie said nothing. Nothing would have been enough. She left it to you, Eugene said, because she needed it to go to someone who'd understand what this ground actually holds. Not just the cellar, the whole of it, what it cost her to stay, what June gave up to leave. He looked out at the fields. She believed you were the right person. I think she was right. What followed was not simple or quick, and anyone who has ever been tangled in a rural Virginia property, dispute complicated by historical fraud, discovered remains and a criminal investigation into a sitting Arlington developer will tell you that simple and quick were never on the table. Marcus was charged with breaking and entering and conspiracy, and once the forensic team opened the sealed cellar and found both Warren Brauer's remains and the documentation of his fraud, with a range of further charges tied to his prior attempts to access the property under false pretenses, some of which implicated a county official he'd been paying for information about the estate. His associates took plea deals. Marcus didn't, which turned out to be a poor decision on his part. The recovered funds, roughly $280,000 in deteriorated cash and bearer bonds, their value requiring considerable legal untangling, became the subject of a separate proceeding to trace the surviving families Warren had defrauded and their descendants. Cassie's cooperation was total. She handed over Helen's preserved documentation without hesitation and sat through 8 hours of interviews with state investigators across 3 sessions. The state gave her a finder's fee and a commendation she pinned to the corkboard in the farmhouse kitchen and mostly forgot about. She completed her 30 days. She signed the deed. She did not go back to Roanoke. That spring, she called her neighbor to arrange for Biscuit to be driven up to the valley in a soft-sided carrier, which he tolerated with loud and sustained objection for the full 2-hour drive, before falling promptly asleep in a patch of afternoon sun on the farmhouse floor, apparently satisfied. Cassie hired 2 people from town to help bring the lavender fields back to full production, maintained but never expanded in Helen's later years, and the eastern slope had room for 8 more rows easily. Eugene still came by most mornings, coffee on the porch in the chair he'd apparently occupied for years, talking soil conditions and the coming season and the water table, and sometimes not talking at all, which was its own kind of conversation. One morning in late April, with the lavender just showing its first low blush of color along the stems. Cassie found him standing at the edge of the west field, watching the mountains in the early light. "She loved this time of day," he said without turning. "I know," Cassie said. She'd read enough of Helen's journals by then to know it. The hour before the valley fully woke was the one Helen kept returning to, the quality of the light, the way the mountains changed color, the smell of lavender before the day's warmth fully opened it. Eugene nodded once. They stood there a while. The full bloom came in June. On a Thursday evening, Cassie stood on the porch and watched the fields move in a slow wind, purple running in long waves up the hillside toward the woods, the mountains steady and blue behind everything, the sky going pink, then gold, then the deep saturated orange of a Shenandoah summer sunset. Biscuit sat on the railing beside her, watching the same fields with the deeply skeptical expression of a cat who has decided the countryside is acceptable, but reserves the right to revise that opinion. She thought about her grandmother at 25, laughing at the camera in this same field. About what it had cost June to leave, to walk away from the only place she'd ever felt something like this, because staying meant living above a secret that could destroy her. About Helen, staying for the reason June couldn't, aging into the land, tending it, refusing to abandon it to whatever might come next if she let go. About what it meant to inherit not just a property but a responsibility, and to decide, after considerable deliberation and at least 2 sleepless nights, that the responsibility was one she wanted. When people ask Cassie now what she found at Brauer Hollow, the money, the remains, the truth, she tells them that's not what Helen meant by the word priceless in that letter. What she found was the answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. Her grandmother's face in a photograph, in a farmhouse in a valley she'd never seen. And the slow understanding that the shape of who she was had been made, in part by that place, by 2 women who had carried something enormous and kept each other standing under the weight of it. What she found was a reason to stay somewhere, which, if you've spent your whole life with nothing resembling a home, is the only thing that was ever going to matter. Now, before you go, I want to ask you something. If that letter had come to you in your mailbox on an ordinary Tuesday, a farm in the mountains, a stranger's name, an impossible stipulation, and a note that said be ready, would you have driven up that road? Would you have taken Marcus As money and walked away clean, or would you have gone down into that cellar, alone in the dark, to find out what was actually there? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story stayed with you the way it stayed with me, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the things we inherit aren't always what they seem, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. There are more stories like this one. There always are.